Question 1. The audit findings indicate that Whitbread's current risk assessment framework may not be sufficiently robust to identify and mitigate emerging operational risks. Which of the following represents the most appropriate next step for Whitbread's management? Option A. Provide all staff with general training on risk management best practices without altering current internal procedures. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review and enhancement of Whitbread's existing risk assessment framework, ensuring alignment with regulatory expectations and the company's strategic objectives. Option C. Immediately procure and implement a new, cutting-edge risk assessment software solution to replace the current system. Option D. Defer any significant action until further operational issues arise, assuming the current findings are not immediately critical. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review and enhancement of Whitbread's existing risk assessment framework, ensuring alignment with regulatory expectations and the company's strategic objectives. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk management with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. The audit findings highlight a potential gap in Whitbread's risk assessment process, which could expose the company to financial, reputational, and legal consequences if not addressed appropriately. The pressure to demonstrate immediate action might lead to superficial solutions, making careful judgment and a thorough understanding of regulatory expectations paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and enhancement of Whitbread's existing risk assessment framework. This is right because it directly addresses the root cause identified by the audit. Regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA in the UK, mandate robust risk management systems. Enhancing the framework ensures that risks are identified, assessed, and mitigated in a systematic and documented manner, aligning with principles of good governance and compliance. This proactive and structured approach demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement and regulatory adherence, which is a core expectation for financial services firms. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a new, unproven risk assessment tool without a thorough evaluation of its suitability for Whitbread's specific operations and regulatory environment is an incorrect approach. This fails to address the underlying deficiencies in the existing framework and could introduce new, unforeseen risks or compliance issues. It bypasses the necessary due diligence required by regulatory bodies to ensure that risk management processes are effective and appropriate. Focusing solely on training staff on generic risk management principles without updating Whitbread's internal policies and procedures is also incorrect. While training is important, it is insufficient if the underlying processes are flawed. Regulations require that policies and procedures are clear, up-to-date, and effectively implemented. Generic training without tailored procedural guidance will not ensure compliance or effective risk mitigation. Adopting a wait-and-see approach, assuming the audit findings are minor and will resolve themselves, is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a disregard for the potential impact of unmanaged risks. Regulatory bodies expect firms to take prompt and effective action in response to audit findings, and inaction can lead to significant penalties and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the precise nature and scope of the audit findings. This involves dissecting the finding to identify the specific areas of weakness. Next, they should consult relevant regulatory guidance and internal policies to determine the required standard of practice. The preferred approach is always one that is systematic, evidence-based, and demonstrably compliant with regulatory expectations. This involves developing a plan that addresses the root cause, is proportionate to the identified risks, and includes mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and review. Decision-making should be guided by a commitment to integrity, competence, and the best interests of the firm and its stakeholders, as well as adherence to the principles of the Whitbread hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework. Question 2. During the evaluation of Whitbread's new service offering, which of the following risk assessment approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and ethical best practices for identifying and mitigating potential operational and reputational threats? Option A. Prioritizing the identification of risks that could directly impact short-term profitability, with a secondary consideration for any obvious regulatory breaches. Option B, focusing exclusively on risks that have materialized in similar offerings by competitors, without considering unique aspects of Whitbread's proposed service. Option C, relying on the experience of senior management to intuitively identify the most significant risks without formal documentation. Option D, conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and documents potential operational, financial, legal, regulatory, and reputational risks, and developing corresponding mitigation strategies. The correct answer is A, prioritizing the identification of risks that could directly impact short-term profitability, with a secondary consideration for any obvious regulatory breaches. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk assessment with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. Whitbread, as a company operating within a regulated industry, must ensure its risk assessment processes are robust, comprehensive, and compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines. The challenge lies in identifying potential risks that could impact the business, its stakeholders, and its reputation, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies without compromising integrity or regulatory standing. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine risks and minor operational issues, and to prioritize actions based on their potential impact and likelihood. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process that considers a broad spectrum of potential risks, including operational, financial, legal, regulatory, and reputational risks. This approach ensures that all significant threats are identified, analyzed, and addressed in a structured manner. Regulatory justification stems from the expectation that companies will proactively manage risks to protect consumers, maintain market integrity, and prevent financial crime, as often mandated by bodies like the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA in the UK, which oversees many aspects of Whitbread's operational environment. Ethical justification lies in the duty of care to stakeholders, including customers, employees, and shareholders, to operate a sound and responsible business. An approach that focuses solely on immediate financial gains, without considering broader regulatory compliance or potential reputational damage, is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This could lead to breaches of regulations designed to protect consumers or ensure fair market practices, resulting in significant fines, legal action, and loss of public trust. Similarly, an approach that neglects to document the risk assessment process or the mitigation strategies leaves the company vulnerable to scrutiny and unable to demonstrate due diligence if issues arise. This failure to maintain proper records is often a direct contravention of regulatory requirements. An approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal opinion rather than data-driven analysis risks overlooking critical vulnerabilities, leading to inadequate risk mitigation and potential future failures. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape, a comprehensive identification of potential risks, a rigorous analysis of their likelihood and impact, and the development of clear, actionable mitigation plans. This framework should be iterative, allowing for regular review and updates as the business environment and regulatory requirements evolve. It should also emphasize the importance of documentation and clear communication to all relevant stakeholders. Question 3. Compliance review shows that Whitbread is considering a new, cost-effective supplier for a critical component of its operations. The supplier has a limited track record and operates in a region with less stringent environmental regulations. Which approach best demonstrates responsible risk assessment for Whitbread? Option A. Conduct a thorough due diligence process, including an assessment of the supplier's financial health, operational capacity, ethical practices, and environmental compliance, and develop mitigation strategies for identified risks. Option B. Prioritize the lowest cost option and defer any detailed risk assessment until a problem arises. Option C. Rely on the supplier's self-certification of compliance and ethical standards without independent verification. Option D. Proceed with the new supplier immediately to capitalize on cost savings, assuming their operational standards are adequate. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the new supplier immediately to capitalize on cost savings, assuming their operational standards are adequate. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient business operations with robust risk management, particularly in the context of Whitbread's commitment to responsible business practices. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential risks that could impact the company's reputation, financial stability, and compliance with regulatory obligations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk assessments are comprehensive, proportionate, and effectively integrated into decision-making processes. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic identification of potential risks associated with a new supplier, followed by a thorough assessment of their likelihood and impact. This includes evaluating the supplier's financial stability, operational capabilities, ethical standards, and compliance history. Implementing mitigation strategies based on this assessment, such as contractual clauses, performance monitoring, and contingency planning, is crucial. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectation that companies manage their supply chains responsibly, minimizing potential harm to stakeholders and the environment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost savings without adequately assessing supplier risk would be professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct due diligence could expose Whitbread to significant reputational damage if the supplier engages in unethical practices or fails to meet operational standards. Another incorrect approach, which relies on assumptions about a supplier's reliability without independent verification, also represents a failure in professional judgment and regulatory compliance. This could lead to disruptions in service, financial losses, and potential legal liabilities. Professionals should employ a structured risk management framework. This involves defining the scope of the assessment, identifying potential risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, evaluating existing controls, and developing appropriate mitigation plans. Regular review and monitoring of identified risks and implemented controls are also essential to ensure ongoing effectiveness. This systematic process allows for informed decision-making that prioritizes the long-term sustainability and integrity of Whitbread's operations. Question 4. Performance analysis shows a recurring pattern of minor discrepancies in Whitbread's revenue recognition across several hotel properties. While individually these discrepancies are below materiality thresholds, their consistent appearance raises concerns about the underlying processes and potential for larger, undetected issues. What is the most appropriate initial risk assessment approach for Whitbread's management to adopt? Option A. Instruct the hotel managers to make immediate, minor adjustments to revenue figures to bring them in line with expectations, and monitor for further discrepancies. Option B. Initiate a broad review of all financial reporting processes across the entire Whitbread group, without specifically focusing on the revenue recognition anomalies. Option C. Assume the discrepancies are immaterial and isolated, and focus resources on other identified business risks within Whitbread. Option D. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the revenue recognition process at the affected properties to identify control weaknesses and potential systemic issues, and then assess the aggregated risk to financial reporting. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the revenue recognition process at the affected properties to identify control weaknesses and potential systemic issues, and then assess the aggregated risk to financial reporting. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Whitbread, as a publicly listed company, has a duty to ensure its financial reporting is accurate and transparent. The performance analysis revealing potential misstatements requires a proactive and rigorous risk assessment to identify the root causes and implement appropriate controls. Failure to do so could lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and loss of investor confidence. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates the potential impact of the identified performance anomalies on the financial statements. This includes understanding the nature of the misstatements, their potential magnitude, and the likelihood of their recurrence. This approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectations for financial reporting accuracy, such as those outlined by the Financial Reporting Council, FRC, in the UK, which emphasizes the importance of robust internal controls and risk management processes. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings without further investigation, assuming they are minor or isolated incidents. This fails to acknowledge the potential for systemic issues or fraud, violating the ethical duty to act with integrity and due diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on superficial adjustments without understanding the underlying causes. This neglects the fundamental requirement to address the root of the problem, leaving Whitbread vulnerable to future misstatements and failing to meet regulatory obligations for effective internal control. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, making quick fixes without adequate analysis, risks overlooking critical control weaknesses and could lead to a false sense of security, ultimately exposing the company to greater risk. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging the reported anomalies as potential risks. This framework involves 1. Information gathering, collecting all relevant data regarding the performance analysis. 2. Risk identification, pinpointing specific areas of potential misstatement and their underlying causes. 3. Risk analysis, assessing the likelihood and impact of these risks on financial reporting. 4. Risk evaluation, determining the significance of the identified risks. 5. Risk treatment, developing and implementing appropriate controls and remediation plans. 6. Monitoring and review, continuously assessing the effectiveness of controls and updating the risk assessment as needed. This systematic process ensures that all potential issues are addressed comprehensively and in accordance with regulatory and ethical standards. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent, albeit slight, deviation from Whitbread's established energy consumption benchmarks for a specific hotel location over the past quarter. This deviation is not yet outside the company's predefined tolerance levels for minor fluctuations, but it is trending upwards. What is the most appropriate next step for the individual responsible for reviewing this data? Option A. Document the trend and continue to monitor it closely, cross-referencing with operational logs and external factors that might explain the deviation before considering any further action. Option B. Ignore the slight upward trend as it is currently within the company's defined tolerance levels and does not represent an immediate breach. Option C. Adjust the monitoring system's thresholds to bring the current consumption levels back within the acceptable range, thereby resolving the apparent anomaly. Option D. Immediately escalate the deviation to senior management and the compliance department for a full investigation, citing potential regulatory noncompliance. The correct answer is D. Immediately escalate the deviation to senior management and the compliance department for a full investigation, citing potential regulatory noncompliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and make a judgment call regarding potential regulatory breaches within Whitbread. The challenge lies in distinguishing between normal operational fluctuations and genuine indicators of noncompliance, which could have significant financial and reputational consequences for the company. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreacting and missing critical issues. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based review of the monitoring data, cross-referencing it with Whitbread's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes accuracy and due diligence. By seeking to understand the context and root cause of any anomalies before escalating, it aligns with the principles of responsible conduct and regulatory adherence expected of employees. This methodical process ensures that any actions taken are justified and proportionate, minimizing unnecessary disruption while safeguarding Whitbread against potential penalties. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate, drastic action without understanding the underlying data is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to unnecessary alarm, wasted resources, and potential damage to internal trust if the anomaly turns out to be benign. Another incorrect approach that involves ignoring or downplaying concerning trends, even if they appear minor initially, is also professionally negligent. This failure to proactively investigate potential issues could lead to more significant problems down the line, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions or harm to customers, and demonstrates a disregard for compliance obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data gathering and analysis. This should be followed by an assessment against established policies and regulations. If a potential issue is identified, the next step is to investigate the root cause. Based on the findings, a proportionate response should be determined, which may involve further investigation, internal reporting, or corrective action. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with ethical and regulatory standards. Question 6. Process analysis reveals that Whitbread is considering implementing a new customer relationship management (CRM) system to enhance guest experiences and personalize marketing efforts. However, the project team is debating the extent to which customer data, including past stay details and preferences, can be utilized for this purpose without explicit, granular consent for each specific use case. What is the most appropriate approach for Whitbread to adopt regarding the use of customer data in this CRM implementation, adhering strictly to UK data protection regulations? Option A. Proceed with collecting and analyzing all available customer data to identify patterns and personalize services, assuming implied consent for business improvement. Option B. Share customer data with third-party marketing partners to leverage their expertise in data analysis and personalization, without obtaining explicit customer consent for such sharing. Option C. Utilize anonymized and aggregated customer data for trend analysis and service improvement, while seeking explicit consent only for direct marketing communications. Option D. Develop a comprehensive data privacy policy that clearly outlines the types of data collected, the purposes for which it will be used, and provides customers with granular control over their data, including opt-out options for specific marketing activities. The correct answer is A. Proceed with collecting and analyzing all available customer data to identify patterns and personalize services, assuming implied consent for business improvement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Whitbread, as a hospitality company, operates in a highly regulated environment where customer data privacy is paramount. The challenge lies in balancing the need for operational efficiency and service improvement with the strict legal obligations surrounding data handling. A failure to adhere to these regulations can lead to significant reputational damage, financial penalties, and loss of customer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data analysis undertaken is both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a proactive and legally compliant method of data handling. This approach prioritizes understanding the specific data protection regulations applicable to Whitbread's operations, such as the UK GDPR, and implementing robust internal policies and procedures that align with these requirements. It emphasizes obtaining explicit consent where necessary, anonymizing data where possible, and ensuring that data is only used for clearly defined and legitimate business purposes. This method is correct because it directly addresses the legal and ethical obligations to protect customer privacy, thereby mitigating risk and fostering trust. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible data stewardship, which is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance and good business practice in the hospitality sector. An approach that involves collecting and analyzing customer feedback without a clear understanding of the applicable data protection laws is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory frameworks, potentially leading to breaches of privacy and noncompliance with data protection principles like lawful processing and purpose limitation. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that all customer data can be freely used for any business improvement initiative without considering consent or anonymization. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to appreciate the sensitive nature of personal data. Such an approach risks violating data protection principles, leading to regulatory scrutiny and potential penalties. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the potential business benefits of data analysis without adequately assessing the associated privacy risks and legal obligations is also professionally unsound. This oversight can result in unintended data breaches or misuse, undermining customer confidence and exposing Whitbread to significant legal and financial repercussions. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant legal and regulatory obligations. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment of any proposed data processing activities, considering potential privacy impacts. Implementing appropriate safeguards, such as consent mechanisms, anonymization techniques, and clear data usage policies, should be a priority. Regular training and ongoing monitoring of data handling practices are also crucial to ensure sustained compliance and ethical conduct. Question 7. Governance review demonstrates that Whitbread is considering the implementation of a new cloud-based inventory management system to enhance operational efficiency and potentially reduce costs. The project team is eager to proceed quickly to realize these benefits, Which of the following approaches to assessing the risks associated with this new system best aligns with robust governance and responsible implementation practices for Whitbread? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates qualitative and quantitative analysis, considers operational, financial, legal, and reputational impacts, and involves input from IT, operations, finance, and legal departments. Option B. Prioritize the assessment of potential cost savings and the speed of implementation, with a secondary focus on any obvious operational disruptions. Option C. Rely primarily on historical risk data from previous inventory management systems, assuming similar risk profiles for the new cloud-based solution. Option D. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to the IT department, trusting their technical expertise to identify all relevant risks. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates qualitative and quantitative analysis, considers operational, financial, legal, and reputational impacts, and involves input from IT, operations, finance, and legal departments. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Whitbread's risk management team to balance the need for operational efficiency with robust compliance and ethical considerations. The pressure to implement a new system quickly, coupled with potential cost savings, could lead to overlooking critical risk factors. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen approach to risk assessment is thorough, compliant with relevant regulations, and ethically sound, protecting both the company and its stakeholders. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that integrates qualitative and quantitative methods, considers all potential impacts, and involves relevant stakeholders. This approach is right because it aligns with best practice in risk management, which emphasizes proactive identification, evaluation, and mitigation of risks. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of good governance and regulatory compliance by ensuring that potential operational, financial, legal, and reputational risks associated with the new system are thoroughly understood before implementation. This systematic process allows for informed decision-making and the development of appropriate controls, thereby safeguarding Whitbread's interests and upholding its ethical obligations. An approach that focuses solely on financial benefits and speed of implementation is professionally unacceptable because it neglects crucial risk dimensions. This failure to conduct a comprehensive assessment could lead to unforeseen operational disruptions, data breaches, or non-compliance with data protection regulations, resulting in significant financial penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which relies only on historical data without considering the unique aspects of the new system, is also professionally flawed. Historical data may not accurately reflect the risks associated with novel technologies or processes, leading to an incomplete understanding of potential vulnerabilities. This can result in inadequate mitigation strategies and increased exposure to risks. A third incorrect approach, which delegates the entire risk assessment to a single department without cross-functional input, is ethically and professionally unsound. This siloed approach risks overlooking critical perspectives from other areas of the business that may have unique insights into potential risks or dependencies. Effective risk management requires collaboration and a holistic view. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a structured and thorough risk assessment process. This involves 1. Defining the scope and objectives of the assessment clearly. 2. Identifying all potential risks across various categories: operational, financial, legal, reputational, technological, etc. 3. Evaluating the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. 4. Developing appropriate mitigation strategies and contingency plans. 5. Documenting the entire process and communicating findings to relevant stakeholders. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment as circumstances change. This systematic and inclusive approach ensures that decisions are based on a comprehensive understanding of potential risks and their implications. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusual trading activity originating from a specific trading desk within Whitbread, which deviates from historical norms but does not immediately trigger any predefined alerts for market abuse. What is the most appropriate initial risk assessment approach? Option A. Initiate a detailed internal investigation into the trading patterns, gathering additional data and context to assess the potential regulatory and compliance implications before taking further action. Option B. Classify the activity as an operational anomaly and monitor it passively, assuming it is a temporary deviation without significant risk. Option C. Request the traders on the affected desk to provide an immediate explanation for their trading patterns without conducting any independent verification. Option D. Immediately escalate the observed activity to senior management and the compliance department, flagging it as a potential high-risk event requiring urgent review. The correct answer is A. Initiate a detailed internal investigation into the trading patterns, gathering additional data and context to assess the potential regulatory and compliance implications before taking further action. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret data from a monitoring system and apply it to a risk assessment within the specific regulatory context of Whitbread's operations, likely governed by UK financial services regulations and SISI guidelines. The core difficulty lies in distinguishing between a minor operational anomaly and a potential indicator of more significant regulatory or compliance breaches. Careful judgment is required to avoid overreacting to insignificant events or, conversely, underestimating potential risks. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based evaluation of the observed anomaly against established risk parameters and regulatory expectations. This means not jumping to conclusions but rather gathering further information, assessing the likelihood and impact of the observed behavior, and then determining the appropriate escalation or mitigation strategy. This aligns with the principles of robust risk management and regulatory compliance, which mandate proactive identification, assessment, and management of risks. Specifically, under UK regulations and SISI guidelines, firms are expected to have effective systems and controls in place to identify and manage risks, including those related to market abuse, financial crime, and operational failures. A measured, investigative approach ensures that actions taken are proportionate and effective, thereby upholding regulatory standards and protecting the firm's reputation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately assume a serious breach without further investigation. This could lead to unnecessary panic, wasted resources, and potentially damage to the reputation of the individuals or departments involved. It fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality in risk management. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the anomaly entirely without any form of assessment. This is a significant regulatory failure, as it demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the firm's duty to maintain effective controls. Such an oversight could allow a genuine risk to escalate unchecked, leading to potential breaches of regulations, such as the FCA's principles for businesses, which require firms to conduct their business with integrity, due skill, care, and diligence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with observation and data gathering, followed by analysis against established policies and regulatory requirements. If an anomaly is detected, the next step should involve understanding its context, assessing its potential impact and likelihood, and then deciding on the appropriate course of action, which may include further investigation, reporting, or implementing corrective measures. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both internal policies and external regulatory obligations. Question 9. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern in transaction volumes for a specific Whitbread subsidiary, deviating significantly from historical averages over the past week. What is the most appropriate initial step to assess this situation? Option A. Immediately escalate the anomaly to senior management and the compliance department, flagging it as a potential regulatory breach. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the subsidiary's transaction data, cross-referencing with internal controls, recent operational changes, and external market factors to identify the root cause. Option C. Dismiss the anomaly as a temporary system glitch or seasonal fluctuation without further investigation, assuming it will self-correct. Option D. Consult with colleagues in other departments to gather informal opinions on whether they have observed similar unusual patterns. The correct answer is A. Immediately escalate the anomaly to senior management and the compliance department, flagging it as a potential regulatory breach. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and make a judgment call regarding potential regulatory breaches within Whitbread. The challenge lies in distinguishing between normal operational fluctuations and genuine risks that could lead to non-compliance with relevant financial regulations. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreacting and potentially disrupting business operations unnecessarily, and underreacting and exposing Whitbread to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based assessment that prioritizes understanding the root cause of the observed anomaly. This means not jumping to conclusions, but instead gathering more information, consulting relevant internal policies and procedures, and potentially seeking expert advice. This methodical process aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible risk management expected of financial professionals. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of regulatory frameworks that mandate proactive identification and mitigation of risks, ensuring that Whitbread operates within legal and ethical boundaries. An incorrect approach that immediately escalates the issue without sufficient investigation fails to demonstrate due diligence. It risks creating unnecessary alarm and diverting resources from genuine issues. This could be seen as a failure to apply professional skepticism and a lack of understanding of normal business variations. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the anomaly without proper inquiry is equally problematic. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to risk management protocols and could lead to overlooking a genuine regulatory breach. Such an oversight could result in significant penalties for Whitbread and a breach of professional conduct. A third incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or personal opinion, rather than objective data and established procedures, is unprofessional and unreliable. This bypasses the structured risk assessment process and introduces subjective bias, which is contrary to regulatory expectations for objective decision-making. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when faced with such situations. This framework typically involves 1. Observation and data gathering, clearly understanding what the monitoring system is indicating. 2. Initial assessment, determining if the observation is within expected parameters or requires further investigation. 3. Root cause analysis, investigating the underlying reasons for any deviation. 4. Risk evaluation, assessing the potential impact and likelihood of regulatory noncompliance. 5. Mitigation and action, developing and implementing appropriate responses. 6. Documentation and reporting, maintaining a clear record of the process and outcomes. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with regulatory and ethical standards. Question 10. Investigation of potential operational vulnerabilities within Whitbread's supply chain. A risk assessment approach that prioritizes identifying and evaluating risks based on their potential impact on customer experience and brand reputation, while also considering regulatory compliance implications, is being considered. Which of the following best describes the most effective and compliant risk assessment methodology for Whitbread in this context? Option A. A risk assessment that focuses exclusively on the financial cost of potential supply chain failures, disregarding operational or reputational impacts. Option B. A reactive risk assessment that primarily reviews past supply chain disruptions and customer complaints to identify recurring issues. Option C. A risk assessment that relies on anecdotal evidence and the opinions of a few senior managers without a structured framework for evaluation. Option D. A comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks across the supply chain, focusing on both likelihood and impact, and documents mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D. A comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks across the supply chain, focusing on both likelihood and impact, and documents mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual at Whitbread to balance the need for proactive risk identification with the potential for overzealous or misdirected scrutiny. The challenge lies in applying a risk assessment framework effectively without creating undue burden or infringing on operational efficiency. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the risk assessment is proportionate, relevant, and aligned with Whitbread's strategic objectives and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of identifying potential risks to Whitbread's operations, reputation, and compliance, and then evaluating their likelihood and impact. This approach is right because it directly addresses the core principles of good governance and regulatory compliance expected of a company like Whitbread. By proactively identifying and assessing risks, Whitbread can implement appropriate mitigation strategies, thereby safeguarding its business and stakeholders. This aligns with the general principles of risk management embedded within UK regulatory frameworks, which emphasize a forward-looking and preventative stance. For instance, the UK Corporate Governance Code encourages boards to consider the company's long-term risks and to have robust risk management systems in place. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical incidents without considering emerging threats or future possibilities fails to provide a comprehensive view of risk. This is a regulatory failure because it neglects the dynamic nature of business environments and the potential for new risks to materialize. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the most visible or sensational risks, regardless of their actual likelihood or impact on Whitbread, is also professionally unacceptable. This can lead to misallocation of resources and a distraction from more critical, albeit less apparent, risks. Such an approach lacks the analytical rigor required for effective risk management and may not satisfy regulatory expectations for a balanced and evidence-based assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding Whitbread's business objectives and the regulatory landscape. This should be followed by a structured risk identification process, utilizing a variety of sources such as internal data, industry trends, and expert consultations. The assessment phase should involve a clear methodology for evaluating likelihood and impact, leading to a prioritized list of risks. Finally, the development and implementation of mitigation plans, along with ongoing monitoring and review, are crucial for effective risk management. Question 11. Market research demonstrates a significant opportunity for Whitbread to expand its hotel portfolio into a new, emerging international market. The proposed expansion involves establishing new properties and potentially acquiring existing local businesses. What is the most prudent approach for Whitbread's management to take in assessing this opportunity? Option A. Immediately proceed with the expansion to capitalize on the first-mover advantage, assuming that the potential revenue growth will outweigh any unforeseen challenges. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies and evaluates potential regulatory, operational, financial, and reputational risks associated with operating in the new market, and develop mitigation strategies before committing to the expansion. Option C. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to the local partners in the new market, trusting their judgment and understanding of the local environment. Option D. Focus primarily on the projected financial returns of the expansion, deferring detailed risk analysis until after the initial phase of market entry. The correct answer is A. Immediately proceed with the expansion to capitalize on the first-mover advantage, assuming that the potential revenue growth will outweigh any unforeseen challenges. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the pursuit of business growth with the imperative to maintain robust risk management practices, particularly in the context of Whitbread's operations. The pressure to expand can sometimes lead to overlooking potential vulnerabilities. Careful judgment is required to ensure that expansion strategies are underpinned by a thorough understanding and mitigation of associated risks, rather than being driven solely by market opportunity. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and assessing potential risks associated with the proposed expansion into new markets. This includes understanding the regulatory landscape of those new markets, potential operational challenges, financial exposures, and reputational risks. By conducting a comprehensive risk assessment, Whitbread can make informed decisions about the feasibility and desirability of the expansion and develop appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and regulatory compliance, ensuring that Whitbread operates within acceptable risk parameters and adheres to all relevant laws and guidelines. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue growth without a commensurate risk assessment fails to uphold regulatory obligations. This oversight could lead to non-compliance with local regulations in the new markets, potentially resulting in fines, legal action, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of market entry over thorough due diligence ignores the fundamental requirement for prudent risk management. This haste can result in unforeseen operational failures, financial losses, and an inability to adapt to local market conditions, all of which are contrary to sound business practice and regulatory expectations. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment into the strategic planning process from the outset. This involves asking critical questions about potential downsides, regulatory hurdles, and operational complexities before committing to a course of action. The framework should encourage a culture of risk awareness, where potential threats are identified, evaluated, and addressed systematically, ensuring that business objectives are pursued responsibly and sustainably. Question 12. The performance metrics show a consistent decline in customer satisfaction scores across several key Whitbread hotel locations over the past 2 quarters, alongside an unexpected increase in reported maintenance issues. Which of the following approaches best addresses the potential risks associated with these trends? Option A. Defer any significant action until the end of the fiscal year, at which point a comprehensive review of all performance data will be conducted. Option B. Engage an external consultancy to conduct a broad audit of Whitbread's entire operational structure without first conducting an internal preliminary assessment. Option C. Initiate a targeted review of operational procedures at the affected locations, focusing on staff training, maintenance scheduling, and guest feedback mechanisms to identify root causes and develop specific mitigation plans. Option D. Immediately implement a company-wide hiring freeze and a 10% reduction in operational budgets for all hotel locations to conserve resources. The correct answer is C. Initiate a targeted review of operational procedures at the affected locations, focusing on staff training, maintenance scheduling, and guest feedback mechanisms to identify root causes and develop specific mitigation plans. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Whitbread, as a publicly listed company, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight and ethical expectations regarding its financial reporting and risk management. The performance metrics, while indicating potential issues, require careful interpretation and a structured approach to risk assessment to avoid knee-jerk reactions or overlooking critical factors. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely action with the requirement for thorough due diligence and adherence to regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the root causes of the performance deviations, potential impacts on financial stability and stakeholder confidence, and the adequacy of existing controls. This approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which mandate proactive identification, evaluation, and mitigation of risks. Specifically, it reflects the spirit of regulations that require accurate financial reporting and robust internal controls to prevent misstatements and safeguard the company's reputation and financial health. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost-cutting without understanding the underlying performance issues risks exacerbating problems or creating new ones. For instance, implementing broad, untargeted cost reductions could negatively impact service quality or employee morale, leading to further performance degradation and potential breaches of customer service standards or employment regulations. Another incorrect approach that involves delaying a formal risk assessment to await further data without initiating preliminary investigations could be seen as a failure to act with due diligence, potentially violating principles of timely disclosure and risk management expected by regulators. A third incorrect approach that involves solely relying on external consultants without internal validation could lead to a lack of ownership and understanding of the identified risks within Whitbread's management structure, potentially hindering effective implementation of mitigation strategies and failing to meet internal governance requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the context and the specific data presented. This involves identifying potential risks, assessing their likelihood and impact, and then evaluating various response strategies against regulatory requirements, ethical considerations, and the company's strategic objectives. The process should prioritize data-driven analysis, consultation with relevant internal and external stakeholders, and a commitment to transparency and accountability. Question 13. When evaluating potential operational risks for Whitbread's hotel division, which approach best balances comprehensive risk identification with practical implementation, considering the company's commitment to guest satisfaction and regulatory compliance? Option A. Relying primarily on incident reports from the past year to identify recurring issues and developing reactive solutions for those specific problems. Option B. Conducting a one-time high-level risk assessment focused only on financial risks to ensure profitability, with minimal input from operational staff. Option C. Implementing a continuous risk assessment program that involves cross-functional teams from operations, finance, and legal to identify, analyze, and prioritize risks across all hotel locations, with a focus on both immediate threats and emerging trends. Option D. Delegating the entire risk assessment process to the IT department, assuming most significant risks are technology-related. The correct answer is C. Implementing a continuous risk assessment program that involves cross-functional teams from operations, finance, and legal to identify, analyze, and prioritize risks across all hotel locations, with a focus on both immediate threats and emerging trends. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Whitbread, as a publicly listed company, has a duty to its shareholders and stakeholders to manage risks effectively. The challenge lies in balancing the need for proactive risk identification with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for overregulation or stifling innovation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk assessments are comprehensive without becoming overly burdensome or impractical. The correct approach involves a structured and systematic process that integrates risk assessment into the core business operations of Whitbread. This means not only identifying potential risks, but also evaluating their likelihood and impact, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with good corporate governance principles and regulatory expectations for companies to have robust internal controls and risk management frameworks. Specifically, regulatory frameworks often mandate that companies have processes in place to identify and manage significant risks that could affect their financial performance, reputation, or compliance obligations. This approach ensures that Whitbread is prepared for potential disruptions and can respond effectively, thereby protecting shareholder value and maintaining stakeholder confidence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging trends or future uncertainties would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the forward-looking nature of effective risk management and could leave Whitbread vulnerable to unforeseen events. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes only the most obvious or immediate risks, neglecting those with a lower probability but potentially catastrophic impact, demonstrates a failure to conduct a thorough and balanced risk assessment. This could lead to significant unforeseen losses or reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to delegate risk assessment entirely to junior staff without adequate oversight or expertise, which undermines the integrity of the process and could result in critical risks being overlooked or misunderstood. This violates principles of accountability and due diligence. Professionals at Whitbread should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the strategic objectives of the company and the regulatory environment in which it operates. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk identification process that considers internal and external factors. Subsequently, risks should be analyzed and prioritized based on their potential impact and likelihood. Mitigation strategies should then be developed and implemented, with ongoing monitoring and review to ensure their effectiveness. This iterative process ensures that risk management is a dynamic and integral part of Whitbread's business strategy. Question 14. The monitoring system demonstrates a series of unusual transaction patterns within Whitbread's customer service operations that deviate from established norms. These patterns, while not immediately indicative of fraud, suggest a potential for breaches of customer data handling protocols. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Immediately flag all transactions associated with these patterns as suspicious and temporarily suspend related customer accounts pending a full review. Option B. Initiate a detailed, multi-stage investigation involving cross-referencing transaction logs with customer interaction records and consulting the data protection officer to ascertain the nature and extent of any potential breach. Option C. Inform senior management of the potential issue and await their directive on how to proceed with any investigation. Option D. Dismiss the patterns as statistical outliers due to the high volume of daily transactions and continue standard monitoring. The correct answer is B. Initiate a detailed, multi-stage investigation involving cross-referencing transaction logs with customer interaction records and consulting the data protection officer to ascertain the nature and extent of any potential breach. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and make a judgment call regarding potential regulatory breaches within Whitbread. The challenge lies in distinguishing between normal operational fluctuations and genuine risks that could lead to non-compliance with relevant UK regulations, such as those pertaining to financial conduct or data protection. Depending on the specific context of the monitoring system, a careful assessment is needed to avoid both overreaction and underreaction, both of which carry significant professional and regulatory consequences. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based evaluation of the observed anomalies. This means not jumping to conclusions, but rather gathering further information, cross-referencing with established policies and procedures, and consulting with relevant internal stakeholders or compliance officers. This methodical process ensures that any decision made is well-informed and defensible, aligning with the principles of due diligence and responsible conduct expected under UK financial services regulations and Whitbread's internal governance framework. It prioritizes accuracy and adherence to established compliance protocols. An incorrect approach that immediately escalates the issue without sufficient investigation fails to uphold the principle of proportionality. It can lead to unnecessary disruption, damage to internal trust, and potentially misallocation of resources. This approach neglects the need for a thorough understanding of the context and the potential for false positives. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the anomalies without further scrutiny or documentation risks regulatory noncompliance. This failure to investigate potential breaches, even if they turn out to be minor, can be seen as a dereliction of duty. It ignores the proactive monitoring requirements and the obligation to identify and mitigate risks, which are fundamental to maintaining regulatory standing and protecting Whitbread's reputation. A third incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or personal judgment, rather than objective data and established procedures, is also professionally unsound. This subjective method lacks the rigor required for regulatory compliance and can lead to inconsistent or biased decision-making, exposing Whitbread to undue risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situation should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the observed anomaly and its potential implications. Second, gather all relevant data and context surrounding the anomaly. Third, consult internal policies, procedures, and relevant regulatory guidance. Fourth, seek advice from subject matter experts or compliance departments if uncertainty exists. Fifth, document the entire process, including the rationale for the final decision, to ensure accountability and provide a clear audit trail. Question 15. Analysis of the internal risk assessment process at Whitbread reveals a potential for misrepresenting the financial performance of a newly acquired subsidiary to meet investor expectations for the upcoming quarterly report. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional ethics for Whitbread's finance team? Option A. Focus on presenting the subsidiary's performance in the most favorable light possible, emphasizing positive trends and downplaying any negative impacts to ensure the overall group results meet or exceed analyst expectations. Option B. Proactively identify and quantify all potential risks associated with the subsidiary's financial data, implement enhanced internal controls for its reporting, and communicate any material uncertainties to senior management and the audit committee. Option C. Delay the full integration of the subsidiary's financial data into the group's reporting until after the current quarter's results are announced, citing ongoing integration complexities as the reason for incomplete reporting. Option D. Rely on the external auditors to identify any significant discrepancies in the subsidiary's financial data during their year-end audit, assuming they will flag any issues that might impact the quarterly report. The correct answer is B. Proactively identify and quantify all potential risks associated with the subsidiary's financial data, implement enhanced internal controls for its reporting, and communicate any material uncertainties to senior management and the audit committee. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Whitbread, as a publicly listed company, has a duty to maintain accurate and timely financial reporting. The pressure to meet investor expectations and avoid negative market reactions can create an environment where there is a temptation to manipulate or misrepresent financial information. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial pressures with the fundamental ethical and regulatory obligations of financial integrity. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and assessing potential risks to the accuracy of financial reporting, particularly in areas prone to subjective judgment or external influence. This includes establishing robust internal controls, conducting thorough due diligence on financial data, and fostering a culture where employees feel empowered to raise concerns without fear of reprisal. Regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK, mandate that listed companies maintain adequate systems and controls to ensure the accuracy and completeness of financial information. Ethical codes, like those promoted by the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment (CISI), emphasize integrity, honesty, and professional competence, all of which are undermined by any attempt to obscure or misrepresent financial performance. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize short-term financial performance over accuracy, perhaps by delaying the recognition of expenses or overstating revenue to meet targets. This directly contravenes regulatory requirements for true and fair financial reporting and violates ethical principles of honesty and transparency. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore or downplay concerns raised by internal teams about potential inaccuracies, especially if these concerns relate to areas that might negatively impact reported figures. This demonstrates a failure in professional duty and a disregard for the company's compliance obligations, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions and reputational damage. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on external auditors to identify all financial misstatements, without undertaking diligent internal risk assessment and control processes. While auditors play a crucial role, the primary responsibility for accurate financial reporting rests with the company's management and internal systems. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a continuous cycle of risk identification, assessment, mitigation, and monitoring. When faced with potential conflicts between commercial objectives and reporting accuracy, professionals must consult relevant internal policies, regulatory guidance, and, if necessary, seek advice from legal or compliance departments. A commitment to transparency and accuracy, even when it leads to short-term negative consequences, is essential for long-term business sustainability and stakeholder trust. Question 16. The monitoring system demonstrates a recurring, albeit low-level, deviation in transaction processing times for a specific customer segment within Whitbread's online booking platform. This deviation falls just outside the company's internal service level agreement, SLA, but remains within broader industry benchmarks. Considering Whitbread's commitment to regulatory compliance and customer satisfaction under UK law, which of the following approaches to assessing this situation is most professionally appropriate? Option A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the deviation, cross-referencing the findings with relevant sections of the FCA handbook and Whitbread's internal risk management policies to determine potential regulatory or operational risks. Option B. Immediately escalate the issue to senior management and the compliance department, flagging it as a potential breach of customer service standards and a risk to regulatory standing. Option C. Focus solely on the financial implications of the slightly slower processing times, assessing if there is a quantifiable loss in potential bookings or revenue. Option D. Monitor the situation for a further period to see if the deviation resolves itself naturally, given that it is currently within industry benchmarks. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the deviation, cross-referencing the findings with relevant sections of the FCA handbook and Whitbread's internal risk management policies to determine potential regulatory or operational risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and apply it to a risk assessment within the specific regulatory context of Whitbread's operations. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a minor anomaly and a potential regulatory breach or significant operational risk, demanding a nuanced understanding of Whitbread's internal policies and relevant UK financial regulations. Careful judgment is required to avoid overreacting to minor fluctuations, while ensuring that genuine risks are identified and addressed promptly. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the monitoring system's output against established risk thresholds and regulatory guidelines. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes a data-driven, evidence-based assessment. By comparing the observed data against predefined risk parameters and considering the potential impact on Whitbread's compliance obligations under UK law, e.g., FCA handbook, relevant company policies, it allows for an objective evaluation. This method ensures that any identified risk is proportionate to the observed data and aligns with the company's risk appetite and regulatory responsibilities, demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to robust risk management. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate financial impact without considering the underlying cause or regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of comprehensive risk assessment, potentially leading to misallocation of resources or overlooking systemic issues. Another incorrect approach that involves disregarding the anomaly due to its infrequency would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This overlooks the principle that even infrequent events can have severe consequences, and regulatory frameworks often require proactive identification and mitigation of all material risks, regardless of their historical occurrence. A third incorrect approach that involves escalating the issue without sufficient initial analysis might be seen as an overreaction, potentially causing unnecessary alarm and diverting resources from more critical concerns, though it is generally preferable to overescalate than to underescalate a genuine risk. However, the most professionally sound action is to conduct a thorough, context-aware assessment first. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the context and the data presented. This involves clearly defining what constitutes a risk within the organization and against which regulatory benchmarks. The next step is to gather and analyze relevant data, comparing it against these defined parameters. Based on this analysis, a determination of the severity and likelihood of the risk should be made. Finally, appropriate actions, ranging from further investigation to immediate remediation or escalation, should be implemented based on the assessed risk level, always in alignment with regulatory requirements and company policy. Question 17. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent pattern of unusual transaction volumes originating from a specific geographical region, alongside a slight increase in failed login attempts from a different set of IP addresses. How should a Whitbread compliance officer best approach assessing the risk posed by these observations? Option A. Focus solely on the volume of alerts generated by the monitoring system, without delving into the specific nature or origin of each alert. Option B. Classify the unusual transaction volumes as a potential indicator of increased customer activity and the failed login attempts as routine security noise, requiring no further action. Option C. Conduct a detailed risk assessment, investigating the nature of the unusual transaction volumes and failed login attempts to determine their potential impact on Whitbread's regulatory obligations and operational security. Option D. Immediately escalate all observed alerts to senior management for their review and decision-making. Correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed risk assessment, investigating the nature of the unusual transaction volumes and failed login attempts to determine their potential impact on Whitbread's regulatory obligations and operational security. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and apply it to a real-world risk assessment within the specific regulatory context of Whitbread's operations, likely governed by UK financial services regulations and SISI guidelines. The challenge lies in moving beyond simple data observation to a nuanced understanding of potential implications for Whitbread's compliance and operational integrity. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor anomalies and significant risks that necessitate immediate action. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment that considers the potential impact of the identified patterns on Whitbread's regulatory obligations and business operations. This approach is professionally sound because it aligns with the principles of robust risk management expected within regulated financial environments. Specifically, it reflects the duty of care to identify, assess, and mitigate potential threats to the firm's stability and compliance. This proactive stance is often mandated by regulatory bodies that expect firms to have systems in place to detect and respond to emerging risks before they materialize into breaches. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the volume of alerts without understanding their context or potential impact fails to meet the standard of due diligence. This approach is ethically and regulatorily deficient because it risks overlooking significant underlying issues that could lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, or financial loss for Whitbread. Another incorrect approach that involves immediate escalation of all alerts without initial analysis is inefficient and can lead to alert fatigue, potentially causing genuine risks to be missed amidst a flood of less critical information. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment in prioritizing and managing information flow. A third incorrect approach that dismisses the alerts as routine without further investigation is particularly dangerous, as it represents a failure to adequately assess potential threats and could lead to serious compliance failures. This directly contravenes the expectation that all reported anomalies should be investigated to determine their significance. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Whitbread. This involves familiarizing oneself with the specific rules and guidelines that govern the firm's activities. And presented with monitoring system data, the next step is to analyze the nature and frequency of the alerts, considering their potential impact on key risk areas such as financial crime, operational resilience, or customer protection. This analysis should then inform a tiered response, where minor issues are logged for ongoing monitoring, and significant or potentially systemic issues are escalated for immediate investigation and mitigation. This systematic process ensures that resources are used effectively and that critical risks are addressed promptly and appropriately. Question 18. Research into Whitbread's operational procedures has identified several potential areas for risk assessment. Which of the following approaches would best demonstrate a proactive and compliant risk management strategy for the company? Option A. Developing a detailed risk register that prioritizes potential threats based on their likelihood and potential impact, focusing resources on mitigating the most significant risks. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive review of all historical incidents and near misses across all Whitbread operations to identify recurring patterns and implement preventative measures. Option C. Implementing a broad, qualitative risk assessment that categorizes all potential risks into low, medium, and high, without detailed analysis of specific impacts or probabilities. Option D. Engaging external risk management consultants to perform a complete audit of all Whitbread systems and processes, with minimal input from internal management. The correct answer is B. Conducting a comprehensive review of all historical incidents and near misses across all Whitbread operations to identify recurring patterns and implement preventative measures. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk identification with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for overregulation. Whitbread, as a hospitality company, operates in a sector with inherent risks related to customer safety, data privacy, and financial integrity. A robust risk assessment framework is crucial for identifying, evaluating, and mitigating these potential threats. The challenge lies in determining the most effective and efficient approach to risk assessment that aligns with regulatory expectations and business objectives without becoming overly burdensome. The correct approach involves a systematic and proportionate assessment of risks, focusing on those with the highest potential impact and likelihood. This aligns with principles of good governance and regulatory compliance, which emphasize a risk-based approach. By prioritizing significant risks, Whitbread can allocate resources effectively, ensuring that critical areas are adequately protected. This proactive stance helps prevent regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and financial losses, demonstrating a commitment to responsible business practices as expected by regulatory bodies and stakeholders. An approach that focuses solely on historical incidents without considering emerging threats or future vulnerabilities is professionally unacceptable. This failure to look forward can lead to a reactive rather than proactive risk management strategy, leaving the company exposed to new or evolving risks. Similarly, an approach that attempts to quantify every conceivable risk, regardless of its materiality, can lead to an overwhelming and unmanageable workload, diverting attention from genuinely significant threats. This can also be seen as a failure to apply professional judgment and proportionality. An approach that relies exclusively on external consultants without integrating internal knowledge and operational understanding is also flawed. While external expertise can be valuable, a comprehensive risk assessment requires deep insight into Whitbread's specific operations, culture, and internal controls, which is best achieved through a collaborative effort. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and the specific risks relevant to Whitbread's industry. This involves identifying potential threats across various domains, operational, financial, compliance, strategic, reputational. The next step is to assess the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. This assessment should be proportionate and informed by both internal expertise and, where necessary, external guidance. Prioritization based on this assessment allows for the development of targeted mitigation strategies. Regular review and updating of the risk assessment process are essential to ensure its continued relevance and effectiveness. Question 19. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Whitbread is considering engaging a new logistics supplier based in a jurisdiction with a moderate corruption index. What is the most appropriate initial step in assessing the potential risks associated with this supplier? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive background check on the supplier's ultimate beneficial owners and their associates, and review their compliance policies and procedures for adherence to anti-bribery and corruption regulations. Option B. Initiate an in-depth forensic audit of the supplier's entire operational history, regardless of initial risk indicators. Option C. Rely solely on the supplier's self-declaration of compliance and their publicly available financial statements to gauge their suitability. Option D. Focus exclusively on the supplier's pricing structure and delivery timelines to ensure competitive terms for Whitbread. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive background check on the supplier's ultimate beneficial owners and their associates, and review their compliance policies and procedures for adherence to anti-bribery and corruption regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Whitbread's compliance team as they navigate the complexities of identifying and mitigating potential risks associated with a new supplier. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient onboarding of a new business partner with the imperative to conduct thorough due diligence, ensuring compliance with all relevant regulations, and maintaining Whitbread's ethical standards. A superficial risk assessment could lead to significant reputational damage, financial penalties, or even legal repercussions if the supplier is found to be involved in illicit activities or non-compliant practices. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate level of scrutiny without unduly hindering business operations. The correct approach involves a multi-layered risk assessment that begins with a broad overview and then drills down into specific areas based on initial findings. This method ensures that resources are allocated effectively, focusing on higher-risk areas identified during the initial screening. By categorizing risks and tailoring the depth of investigation accordingly, Whitbread can achieve a robust understanding of potential vulnerabilities. This aligns with the principles of proactive risk management and regulatory compliance, which mandate that firms establish and maintain adequate systems and controls to prevent financial crime and ensure responsible business conduct. The specific regulatory framework for Whitbread, assumed to be UK Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, and relevant UK legislation like the Bribery Act 2010 and Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, would expect such a structured and proportionate approach to due diligence. An incorrect approach that relies solely on readily available public information without further investigation fails to meet the due diligence requirements. This superficial assessment could overlook critical red flags, such as undisclosed beneficial ownership or a history of regulatory breaches, thereby exposing Whitbread to significant risks. This approach violates the principle of knowing your customer, and in this case, your supplier, and the regulatory expectation to take reasonable steps to understand the nature and risks associated with business relationships. Another incorrect approach, which involves conducting an overly exhaustive and time-consuming due diligence process for every single supplier regardless of their perceived risk, is inefficient and impractical. While thoroughness is important, an indiscriminate approach can lead to significant delays in onboarding essential partners, impacting business operations, and potentially causing Whitbread to miss out on valuable opportunities. This demonstrates a lack of proportionality in risk management, which is also a key expectation of regulatory bodies. A third incorrect approach, focusing only on the financial stability of the supplier without considering their regulatory compliance or ethical standing, is fundamentally flawed. Financial health is only one aspect of supplier risk. A supplier might be financially sound, but engage in unethical practices or operate in a non-compliant manner, which could still expose Whitbread to severe reputational and legal damage. This approach neglects the broader spectrum of risks, including those related to anti-bribery, corruption, and data protection, which are critical components of a comprehensive risk assessment. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to due diligence. This involves establishing clear criteria for risk categorization, developing tiered investigation protocols, and ensuring that the depth of due diligence is proportionate to the identified risk level. Regular review and updating of risk assessments are also crucial to adapt to changing circumstances and emerging threats. This systematic process ensures that Whitbread can make informed decisions about its supplier relationships, safeguarding its reputation and ensuring compliance with its regulatory obligations. Question 20. Comparative studies suggest that effective risk assessment within hospitality firms like Whitbread is crucial for long-term stability. Considering a scenario where Whitbread is evaluating potential risks associated with a new online booking platform, which of the following approaches best aligns with robust risk management principles and regulatory expectations? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that includes analyzing potential cybersecurity threats, data protection compliance under GDPR, operational disruptions, and reputational damage, seeking input from IT, legal, and customer service departments. Option B. Focusing the risk assessment primarily on the technical feasibility of the platform, assuming that any operational or security issues will be minor and easily resolved post-launch. Option C. Relying solely on the risk assessments provided by the platform's external vendor, without conducting independent verification or considering Whitbread's specific operational context. Option D. Prioritizing the assessment of risks that could immediately impact revenue targets, while deferring the evaluation of potential data privacy concerns to a later stage. The correct answer is D. Prioritizing the assessment of risks that could immediately impact revenue targets, while deferring the evaluation of potential data privacy concerns to a later stage. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for timely and accurate risk assessment with the potential for bias introduced by internal pressures or pre-existing relationships. Whitbread, as a company operating within a regulated environment, must ensure its risk assessment processes are objective and adhere to established guidelines to maintain stakeholder confidence and regulatory compliance. The pressure to present a favorable view can lead to overlooking or downplaying emerging risks, which is a significant ethical and regulatory concern. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and objective assessment of all identified risks, regardless of their source or potential impact on immediate business objectives. This means actively seeking out diverse perspectives, utilizing robust data analysis, and critically evaluating assumptions. Regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA in the UK, emphasize the importance of robust risk management systems that are forward-looking and consider a wide range of potential threats. Ethical considerations also dictate a duty of care to stakeholders, including customers, employees, and shareholders, which necessitates transparency and honesty in risk reporting. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical data without considering new market trends or competitor actions fails to meet the forward-looking requirements of modern risk management. This can lead to a false sense of security and leave Whitbread vulnerable to unforeseen events. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes risks with immediate financial implications over those with longer-term reputational or operational impacts neglects the holistic nature of risk management. Regulatory bodies expect a balanced consideration of all material risks. Furthermore, an approach that dismisses concerns raised by junior staff due to their perceived lack of experience without proper investigation demonstrates a failure in due diligence and can stifle a culture of open communication essential for effective risk identification. This can also be seen as a breach of the duty to foster a sound internal control environment. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope of the risk assessment. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders and potential risk categories. Next, data gathering should be thorough and unbiased, incorporating both quantitative and qualitative information. The analysis phase requires critical evaluation, challenging assumptions, and considering a range of potential outcomes. Finally, the reporting and mitigation phase must be transparent, actionable, and aligned with regulatory expectations and ethical principles, ensuring that all significant risks are appropriately addressed.